two sovereign nations apparently powerless to comply with a Supreme Court order. President Trump in the Oval Office, you see him there, meets with El Salvador's leader. As the fate of a Maryland man, his name, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, remains uncertain. He's been deported to El Salvador. The administration says it is not required to bring him back, and El Salvador's leader says he can't and won't return him. This is important in the context of the president again floating the idea of deporting to El Salvador or possibly elsewhere so-called homegrown criminals of the U.S.
We also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country.
Also, Wall Street starts the week nominally up, but investors and importantly bond traders are still bracing for more volatility following what can only be described as mixed messages from the White House on President Trump's tariff policies. Also, harboring hate, that's a quote. That's what the man accused of setting fire to the Pennsylvania governor's mansion told police about his feelings toward that governor, Josh Shapiro. What we've learned about the alleged attacker's motive. This, just the latest chapter in a surge of American political violence. We start tonight with CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez, who joins me from New York, and right here at the desk, national investigative reporter for the Washington Post, Silvia Foster-Frau. Camilo, let me start with you. Catch us up on where things stand with Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
Hi, Major. Well, over the weekend, the Justice Department provided the first known details about Mr. Abrego Garcia's whereabouts since he was mistakenly deported to El Salvador back in March during that high-profile operation that also included deportations of Venezuelans to El Salvador for the purpose of imprisoning them in that notorious Secot prison in that country. We know that the Justice Department has said that this man is alive and secure at that facility, but it has yet to detail any steps that the administration has taken to comply with that court ruling under which it is now bound to take steps to, quote, facilitate, unquote, his return to the U.S. The administration, Major, seems to be taking a legal position that facilitate merely entails the administration taking any steps to facilitate his entry into the country if the sovereign country of El Salvador decides to release him and bring him to the U.S., which, of course, as we now have learned today, it looks like the government of President Nayib Bukele is not inclined to do so.
Right, and President Bukele said he's not going to do it, and so that's why I said what I did to open the show. Two sovereign countries saying that they're powerless to do anything to make this court order valid, even though both nations have plenty of powers at their disposal.
That's right. And again, it is very unclear under which legal authority the U.S. sent Mr. Abrego Garcia to El Salvador, and also under which legal authority the government in El Salvador is holding him, and whether there's any legal mechanism or any avenue that Mr. Abrego Garcia can exercise to try to contest this allegation that he's a gang member and contest his detention in that Salvadorian prison. Because again, he has not been convicted of a crime either here or in El Salvador. So there's no sentence that he's currently serving. So that is a key element to this discussion, Major.
And Silvia, that's a great point for us to pick up on, because not only has the administration, the Trump administration, branded Kilmar Abrego Garcia a gang member, though there is scant evidence to back that up. There is some suggestion from an anonymous source before one immigration court proceeding that he might have had gang alliances. The president of El Salvador called him a terrorist. And the administration now also has upped the ante from gang member to terrorist. And this declaration, they say, gives them the right to basically ignore all due process rights he might otherwise possess.
Yeah, so we've seen this kind of evolving over time, right? Like first you had the meeting with the Salvadoran president and Marco Rubio saying we're going to have an agreement of some kind with this prison. Then you see that same month in February that MS-13 and Tren de Aragua are labeled as foreign terrorist organizations. Now you have in March, these groups of over 200 people that were sent to the Salvadoran prison under the allegation that they're part of this Alien Enemies Act, which goes after Tren de Aragua, which is now a terrorist organization. So we've seen all these elements building over time to try to justify essentially skipping immigration court proceedings and deporting people straight to, or, deporting is the word they use, but really transferring them to El Salvador's
And help
prison.
the audience understand, when asked for evidence, what does the administration typically do in these cases?
Yeah, so
kind of play dodgeball a little bit, right?
Yeah, so, a lot of times they've been saying, including with questions about this entire operation, that they are invoking a state secrets privilege, that a lot of this information has to do with foreign relations and diplomatic relations, and so they can't release it. And when it comes to the actual specifics of evidence, as you mentioned, there was an anonymous person who had said Gilmar was a member of the gang. But apart from that, there's very little, which is why the district judge, has said, like, hey, we need more information here before we can agree that this person, we can override this person's withholding of removal and send them to the place that they're fleeing.
And the larger context for this, Silvia, is something that can be found in the 9-0 court ruling on this, something that was said by Justice Sotomayor, essentially saying that the government's argument implies it could deport anyone or incarcerate anyone, including a U.S. citizen, without legal consequence if it does so before a court can intervene. That's Sotomayor's larger fear about the bigger ramifications of what we're talking about here.
Yes, and I think we're starting to see that, right? I mean, that is the case. If the Alien Enemies Act is legal, right, which is debated, that is what you're allowed to do, is essentially skip immigration proceedings. We even have some examples that have already happened of skipping, people who are on trial for crimes that have then been just immediately swept up and taken and deported and never even have to answer for those crimes. So it kind of goes both ways, right? Like, you can't prove that you're innocent, but even for people who maybe would be guilty, right, they're not actually serving out their full due process, conviction and all of that. They're just getting taken from the United States.
And Camilo, back to you in New York. It was said today in the Oval Office repeatedly that no one was mistakenly deported, and the 9-0 court ruling was a victory for the White House and the Trump administration. Help the audience get to contextual truth on both of those assertions.
Well, just to level set, Major, multiple high-ranking officials at the Department of Justice, at the Department of Homeland Security, including at the sub-agency Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, have testified in court in sworn declarations that Mr. Gilmar Abrego Garcia was indeed mistakenly deported to El Salvador. Why? Well, he had an order from a judge in 2019 that protected him from deportation to El Salvador, and despite that, he was sent there. They could have very well sent him to a third country like Guatemala or Colombia, but they sent him to the country, Major, rather, where he alleged he faced persecution by gangs, and they have admitted that they made a mistake in doing so.
Our own Camilo Montoya-Galvez in New York, the Washington Post, Silvia Foster-Frau, here with me at the desk. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it. Olivia Rinaldi joins me now. Olivia, there was another big topic at the White House today and over the weekend, which is the fate of tariffs and exemptions and language about buckets and temporary. I know you cannot sort it all out, but help us try to piece together what we do know.
Oh, Major, can anyone sort it out? It's been so much back and forth. It's been difficult to follow. And you'll have different administration officials on different Sunday shows saying different things. So just to level set here, what we heard last week was that there's not going to be a blanket tariff on any of those reciprocal countries, or rather there will be a blanket tariff, that 10% tariff, but those reciprocal tariffs are not going to go into effect. And instead, there's going to be a 145% tariff on Chinese products. Now, about a quarter of the products that come in from the United States, to the United States from China are those electronics. So your smartphones, your iPads, any of your TVs, all of those are made in China and then brought here. Trump said on Friday that those will be exempted. Then we heard that they won't be exempted, and instead there will be some type of tariff put on them over the weekend. So there was a lot of back and forth from the president and Secretary Howard Lutnick on this specific issue of what electronics are going to face tariffs. There's also questions about semiconductor tariffs as well. Now, this is a very, very crucial part of not only a U.S. economic development plan, but a future military plan, because semiconductor chips are really the backbone of everything we do. They're in cars, they're in phones, they are in military equipment, they're all over the country, and Trump is making a concerted effort to make them be produced here in the United States. However, he says in order to achieve that, there will be incoming tariffs on that industry. And that's important because the majority of our chips come in from Taiwan. And I know we have talked extensively about the diplomatic, military, and economic importance of Taiwan to the United States, the fact that they could be facing incoming tariffs on semiconductor chips, quite notable. But I was doing a little bit of research today on specifically how important semiconductors are and why everyone in the world seems to be racing to make them. And over the next 10 years or so, about 108 semiconductor facilities are expected to be built worldwide, the majority of them in East Asia. Only 15 of them built in the United States, and Trump is looking at that playbook, seeing it could potentially be unfair and trying to make some sort of move to get a lot of those manufacturers to make those chips here in the United States.
And Olivia, the president, as he is wont to do, took several questions in the Oval Office today. And at one point he said, I'm not going to change my mind, meaning on tariffs and trade, but I am going to be flexible. And then he started to talk about things that he was going to do or intending to do or thinking about doing for the auto industry and auto parts and an adjustment period. Again, adding, it seemed to me, another bit of uncertainty about what actually is or isn't going to be the tariff policy with that industry.
Major, I believe you just described what he calls the weave, which is where he starts one place and then moves to a different place and then, kind of touches on other things throughout there. I covered the campaign, you covered the campaign. We're both very familiar with the weave. But it did seem like he was starting to do that. He also mentioned that he had a conversation with Tim Cook and that he's flexible on tariffs. And of course, we know that Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, that's a huge part of their imports to the United States are electronics, so quite notable there. Trump also said that on pharmaceutical tariffs, those will be coming in the not-too-distant future. A lot of pharmaceutical products are produced not in the United States. They are produced in Europe. They are produced in China, which we learned very much the hard way during the COVID pandemic. Trump appears to have learned from his experience 4 years ago during that, and wants to increase pharmaceutical production here in the United States. But again, it's hard for markets and these businesses to really decide what to do. They still kind of feel like they're in limbo. There's this 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs and more tariffs coming on China, 10% tariffs on everything. But when specific industries are being targeted and they're not sure when or where or how and in what capacity, it's really hard for the markets and for these businesses to operate in a way that makes money and that is efficient, and that gives them the opportunity to increase their business and their stake in the United States.
The tale of the tariffs sorted out as best as humanly possible by our own Olivia Rinaldi. Thanks so very much.
I try, Major.
And you succeed.